Awesome. It's great to be here today and great to be a part of Boise Entrepreneur Week, such an awesome event. I am Alison Johnson. I am a corporate attorney. I work here for the law firm of Wilson Sonsini, Goodrich, and Rosati, which is quite a mouthful. I help startups, entrepreneurs, and investors from formation through financing and ultimate exit. I think probably before I dive into my slides, it makes sense for the panel to do some short introductions so you know who is in the room. So Matt, we'll start with you.
Hello. All right, it's my first time ever holding a microphone. It's heavier than I thought. See if I can master it. I'm Matt Bishop. I bought a mule off of Craigslist in 2016. I started serving coffee in a free coffee service in the Boise foothills and realized that serving free coffee is not a sustainable business model. So I decided to start a company that sells cold brew and roasted coffee. So we've become Iron Mule Inc. We have 3 brands. We have Ironside Roasting Company, Cafe Mule, and Direct Access. My partner and our employees, we've grown both considerably and shrunk and regrown. And over the past 6 years, we've been navigating that space. And happy to be here. And I will mention that Meg's on my board of advisors, and we asked her to come on at a very pivotal time a couple years ago, so that hopefully seed for some further conversation.
Hi, my name is Christian Perry, one of the founders and CEO of ChatterQuant. Most people are familiar with what happened with GameStop, a couple of years ago. Essentially, those GameStop, AMC, Bed Bath & Beyond, those stocks ran thousands of percentage points because people were talking about them on social media. What we do is anytime somebody posts online on Twitter, Reddit, TikTok, we digest that information, aggregate kind of discussion around stocks, and we sell that to hedge funds and banks. We were venture backed out of Boise from Capital 11 and have about 4 or 5 advisors.
Great. Meg?
Sure. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm a longtime Boise resident. I started my career with Ore-Ida Foods, which is part of now Kraft Heinz, and spent almost 20 years there in various roles, executive roles, building brands around the world. And since that time, I've served multiple roles. I was a co-founder of a merger and acquisition firm, and got involved in the local angel investing community and became an independent director for a company that was called Western Electronics for a 3-year term. And then I became an investor and board member in a company called Prosperity Organic Foods. And after a year was asked to step up and be CEO to grow that company, build the team, recruit a formal board of directors, run quarterly board meetings. So I definitely walked those shoes. And in the last 3.5 years, I founded a company called Uproar Capital, and I focus on advising early stage high growth food and beverage brands across the country. And I currently serve on 5 advisory boards and 1 board of directors.
Awesome. So the run of show today is I'm going to do a little speech about what is the board of directors, what are board advisors, what are board observers, so that those people in the room can get an idea of what these various roles are. Some of you serve in those roles. Some of you are searching for people to serve in those roles. So I want to give a little educational talk about what each of those roles is. And then we'll open it up. We'll have a panel discussion. And then in the last 10, 15 minutes, we'd love to open up for questions from the audience if there are any. Let's see. Where do I point this? Do I point it here? Yeah, look at that. It's very bright. Yeah, you guys can't see, but I can. So that's okay. That's what matters. So oftentimes people come to me having just started their business or having had an idea to start a business. A lot of times these are 2 co-founders or a small group of co-founders, or sometimes it's just a single individual with a great idea or a product. And oftentimes we're asked, where do I start? How do I start forming a team? I don't have any money. I just have this great idea. but I want to make connections and learn from people, and I want people to help me. And so that's where this original role of an advisor comes in. An advisor is more of an informal role. Oftentimes it's somebody, it's a friend or family member who you know in the business community who has some kind of vested interest in you or your product. They're interested in you, they like your coffee, they knew you from church, or you used to be an employee of theirs. They have some kind of interest in you, and they have something to add to you. So a lot of times this singular advisor is where a lot of founders start their connections with the business community. As people grow, they often ask, I've heard about a board of advisors. What is a board of advisors? And a board of advisors is, I'll call it a predecessor to an actual company board of directors. It's an informal committee of advisors, trusted people who are helping you in your business. And it often serves a specific strategic goal, whether that's to grow your marketing, to advise on some technical aspect, to kind of fill the knowledge gaps that you as an executive or your team may have. Oftentimes, people look for people with industry experience or having had a successful exit or something that they can use to their advantage in having a board of advisors with these successful, proven track records who have signed on to help them as a board of advisors. So a lot of times when you go out and you're building your pitch deck for investors, you will put your board of advisors on that pitch deck to lend credibility to a new company because, hey, these people, these big players who have had these big exits or had these great opportunities have signed on to my company as advisors because they believe in me and what we're doing. So a lot of times it lends credibility. So the responsibilities of advisors, how they are different than a board of directors is they don't have fiduciary duties. And what that means, I'll get into the board of directors next, but what that means is they can advise with total open communication, and they don't have to be advising you on how to increase shareholder value. They don't have duties to the shareholders of your company. Why that's different and why that's good is because you have open, total, honest communication with advisors. They may provide a perspective that your board of directors can't or won't provide, and they can be totally honest with their experience. They don't have a corporate oversight role, so their job is not to hire or fire you as CEO. They do not have, or their specific expectations are often built into an advisory agreement. So if you sign somebody on to be an advisor because you have a specific task they want, they're going to help you grow revenue, they're going to help market your product, they're going to build your tech, they're going to make introductions. A lot of times companies will have advisory agreements specifying this role and the expectations that you will serve as an advisor. Usually those come into play when your advisor is getting compensation in exchange for their services, either in the form of equity or cash. They're often called upon to expand business and networking contacts. So when you think about who may serve on your board of advisors, think about those people that can make introductions to you that will be helpful to the company, whether that's to future customers, partners, manufacturing facilities, people who are connected to the organizations and people that will help grow your business. Now we move into the board of directors. The role of a board of directors is to oversee the company management and business strategies to achieve long-term value creation. So the board of directors have those fiduciary duties, the duty of care, the duty of loyalty. Ultimately, their goal is to increase shareholder value. Their responsibility is to increase shareholder value. Now, this is changing a bit with B Corps and other ESG initiatives where boards can take into account things other than shareholder value. But putting aside the last 5 years, a board had a fiduciary duty to increase shareholder value. So what does that mean? They serve a supervisory role. They will help manage the business and oversee the business affairs of the company, and then will assess performance. They will assess performance of the company, and they will assess performance of the management team, including you. The strategic advisory responsibilities of the board is more high-level oversight. They're not going to be involved in the day-to-day business, whereas a board of advisor might be that type of person that you have daily calls with, or weekly calls with, or monthly calls with. People typically meet with their board once a quarter for formal board meetings, presenting company financials and other information that is important for that strategic oversight role. Yes, we have a question. I like it.
Does this really this applies to corporations? Does it apply to corporations or LLCs? Others, they don't. That's the structure.
That's a great question. So to repeat the question is, does this apply to just corporations or LLCs or other business entities, right? Board of directors and board of advisors generally can apply to any organization. An LLC has typically what's called a board of managers. Some people call it a board of directors. The fiduciary duties, that all depends on the courts in each state and how they apply those fiduciary duties to the board of managers in an LLC. It's a different body of law, but generally speaking, the responsibilities and the roles are the same. Does that answer your question? Excellent. Anybody else has any questions, please pipe up. So in addition to the board of directors, I thought it was important to highlight preferred director seats and what that means. So if you're a company who's lucky enough to take on outside financing from a venture capital firm or something, they will oftentimes ask for a board seat. And along with that board seat, they're oftentimes going to say they want certain approval rights over certain matters as a board member. So generally speaking, each board member has one vote and the majority carries the day. But if you bring on these preferred directors, almost always they will ask to have specific approval rights over certain matters with the idea that they're protecting their investment that they just put into the company. They don't want to be overruled on the really big things that matter to the economic value of their investment. In addition to the board seat, they'll also ask for protective provisions. These are things that are not dictated to be voted on by shareholders by law, but they're going to say, we want a specific vote on this as a shareholder. And so those are just some things to keep in mind when you think about your board of directors and when you have to go to your board of directors and when you have to go to your shareholders to approve certain actions. Some of the things they'll ask for control over is rights to approve a change of control transaction. That's rights to approve the sale of the company. Again, they want to know, what am I going to be paid out in this transaction? So they want to have a say. Amendments to your certificate of incorporation or your bylaws, your basic governing documents that dictate what shareholder rights are. Hiring and firing of management. A lot of times they'll have a threshold that says they want to approve any employees who are making over X dollars. Issuing additional shares of stock that may have rights that are senior to their rights, and incurring debt and other financial instruments and obligations. Oh no, I got out of control there. So in summary, what's the difference between a board of director, a board observer, and a board advisor? First of all, the board observer is a special category. A board observer, when somebody asks for board observer rights, what they're asking for is the ability to come attend your board meetings, receive all the information and materials, and be able to participate in those discussions at the board meeting, but they do not have a vote, and they do not have fiduciary responsibilities. So they just come, they don't have any liability associated with their decisions. They don't get an actual say, but they want to have the ability to be heard. A board of director seat has those fiduciary duties, the duty of loyalty, the duty to protect shareholder value. And the board advisor is that more informal role that often serves a very specific and strategic function in helping you get off the ground, helping you increase revenue, advising on some specific role or relationship. What to look for in a board when you're considering expanding the board or adding a board of advisors? My advice to my clients is to really look at two things. Why are you giving somebody a board seat? And what are they going to add to the company? If you're giving somebody a board seat because they're giving you $10 million to grow your company, that's probably a fair trade. If you're giving somebody a board seat because they have proven their strategic value to the company and introduced you to partners and investors, that's probably a great thing. If it's somebody who can offer an independent perspective, who can challenge you and hold you accountable in a way that feels positive to you, that's probably a good thing. But what you have to know is the board controls the company. So you as a founder, as an entrepreneur, as an executive, want to be careful with giving those board seats away. So oftentimes you use the advisory seat as kind of a runway to a board member, as a trial basis. If somebody you bring on in an advisory capacity, you get that time to try them out and see, is this the right cultural fit for the company? Does this feel right? Can I have open and honest communication with them? Are they challenging me in a way that brings out the best of me and makes me feel like I want to succeed? Those are great partners. So something you should think about when you're making those decisions. And then I get asked this question all the time. Should you compensate board members, board advisors, and board observers? It's a great question. A lot of it depends on what that value is that they're bringing to the table. Your board of directors, when you take on preferred money and they get that board seat, oftentimes you as a company are committing to pay for their travel and expenses to all of your board meetings. And if they ask for that board observer seat, that non-voting seat, a lot of times you're agreeing to pay for those expenses too. So you want to be careful to talk about that. You don't have to pay by them. It's not, by rule or law, but oftentimes that's in their agreement with you. So something that you really ought to consider. With board of advisors on startups, it's oftentimes paid for with equity. And my advice is to always have that board advisory agreement with the expectations of how that advisor is going to serve the company laid out very clearly, so it's clear what they're getting or what you as a company are getting in exchange for the equity that you're giving out. You always want to tie it to vesting terms. So if for some reason the board advisory role just isn't working out, you can terminate the relationship and get back the portion of the equity that hasn't been earned. So it's a really important thing to think about as early stage companies. Yes, I think we have another question.
So are the board advisors temporary or not?
Yeah, so the question was, are your board advisors temporary? It's a great question. So board advisors are essentially serving by contract. They're not elected positions. They are serving at the will of the board of directors and the executives of the company. So oftentimes they're very long-standing relationships, but you can terminate the relationship at any point in time. Board of directors, on the other hand, they're elected by the shareholders. So as a general rule, you elect your directors with the majority vote of your shareholders or your members in an LLC. But oftentimes, those investors that come in and invest in the company also ask for the right to elect a director. So it becomes a very your board structure becomes a very negotiated thing as you progress and grow as a company. Yes?
What are your thoughts on founders and CEOs holding board seats?
So I think the question is, what's my thought on founders and CEOs holding a board seat? We almost always see a founder or a CEO holding a board seat. We also see a lot of times founders and CEOs negotiate that they will always have a board seat, even if they are no longer a founder or a CEO. So that if they're ever in a position where they're terminated and they don't control the stockholder vote, but still have a large portion of shares, they get the right to be involved in those higher level strategic decisions. The founder or CEO is going to be in the boardroom regardless of whether they are a board member or not, because they are the ones that oftentimes present to the board, present the financials of the company, strategic operational plans, business plans, etc. So they're going to be in the boardroom, and especially at the startup and early stage, they almost always have a board seat. Any other questions at this point until we dive into our panel discussion here? If somebody says something that triggers a question for you, please don't hesitate to ask. So, Meg, I think I'll start with you because you have very interesting experience and wide-ranging for this discussion. You've served as a board advisor, a board of director, and a CEO and founder of companies. So, how would you advise startup companies to look for their first outside director? What skills and skill sets do you think are important as they think about letting an outsider into their company?
Director, not advisor.
Yeah, director.
Okay.
A vote. Not
vote.
controlling the
Correct.
company, but has a vote.
Yeah. My experience was that I wanted to find a mix of people who brought industry-specific expertise in functional areas. And I wanted them all to be soundly based with strategic building of a company in the future. I don't want mechanics. I don't want mid-level managers. I want experienced executives who have strategic expertise in the whole business, and then particular functional expertise in areas that are critical to the company. I also want founder-friendly board of directors, especially if third-party investors have told me that I have a new board of director because investors have a different agenda. It's always really about the money. And so I have found I need to balance that with those who have either served on early stage growing founder-led companies and have high level of sensitivity to how difficult that role is and what the challenges are, and or somebody who's actually a founder, a CEO, somebody who's gone through that journey either one or more times over an extended period.
That's great advice. Matt, I'm going to direct my next question to you. You mentioned that you and Meg work together. I would be interested in, I think the audience would be interested in hearing how you use a board advisor. How do you use them to help answer questions and, challenge you, like I said, in a way, and provide that value? How have you used your advisors?
Yeah, I think I'll start by speaking to when we actually chose to build a board of advisors. So we've been operating for a few years as a coffee roaster selling locally and had already achieved a regional account in grocery of about 30 stores. And all of that seemed somewhat manageable with the team we had, myself, my co-founder. I was a military officer. I came in with business education. My partner came in with a lot of deep technical skills as far as the food production space. But we got to a point where we said, we now want to make the jump and get national placements in grocery with our product. And at the same time, we want to start a program that does real legitimate profit sharing with smallhold coffee farmers. So there's a lot of skill sets that go into that, and we started to identify gaps in our really expertise. So, one of those gaps was scaled grocery distribution. And, in our business, you're working through a distributor who's then taking your product on, to Albertsons or Kroger, whoever it might be. And there's a lot of nuances around how that works. Obviously, on the green coffee side, there's deep knowledge that goes into cultivating coffee, processing for export, doing all that, and we were interested in the finances of that, which added an additional layer. So we looked for people with skill sets in those areas, who had relevant experience in those areas, and then because we were growing, we knew that we wanted to have enough capital to actually sustain our plans. So we were raising money at the same time, and that was a little bit of it as well. Was looking for people with deep financial background, specifically in raising capital, and then who might be able to provide introductions for us to continue with our capital raise there. So, those were kind of the skills we were looking for broadly. I think I was, good in some ways at using our advisory board and not so good in others. I realized after a while that I'm not just saying this because she's up here, but Meg is my most active advisor. And I think we had very clear communication up front on what our expectations were going to be, and that was part of it. But I felt like I pretty much had that with all of my 5 advisory board members, but many of them were only going to be responsive to me to the degree that I was really prompting them and pulling things. And I will say that I found a limitation as a founder in both, managing what I did in the day-to-day of the business and really leveraging that advisory board. I'll give myself a little break that it was, COVID hit early on in this time period, and there was some complications in, the grand plan of bringing everyone into one room and doing all this stuff that I otherwise would have wanted to do. But I used my advisory board and, to shore up those knowledge gaps. But I would say, if you're going to build a board of advisors, especially if you're going to compensate them in some manner, equity or otherwise, I would ask yourself as a founder, do I have the bandwidth and the structure to both run my business and make sure that I optimize all of these advisory board members? If not, maybe you can, build a smaller board or, manage things a little bit differently.
That's a great point. When you have given an ability to earn equity to folks, if you don't utilize them and they stand ready, you're maybe not getting the biggest bang for your buck. So maybe adding one advisory seat at a time. I think it's great that you guys establish expectations, of what role. And I love that you looked for people that served different functions. If you build an advisory board with everybody who does the same thing, they're not going to provide that diversity of experience that you could really benefit from by assembling an advisory board. Now, Christian, I know you're relatively new in your experience. I was going to say you're relatively young. You just are young. And you're balancing a lot of things all at once. How are you thinking about setting up advisors, and in what roles have you found people in the community or elsewhere to serve in that advisory capacity?
Sure. So I appreciate you bringing up my age, because that's actually part of what led us into looking for advisors. We attended a trade show in Paris called Trade Tech, which is a trading conference, one of the biggest in the world, and we had our booth set up. And I remember on multiple occasions, someone came up to, our whole team is, about my age, and we're kind of young guys. And one person came up and, shouldn't you be in school? And somebody else, to one of my co-founders, are you old enough to be here? And that really, made us realize, that in order for us to have, or at least get some credibility in the space that we were looking to build in, that having some people who have been through it, who, are a bit older and more experienced in the space was going to be a big positive for us. In terms of what we've done to find advisors, I mean, we have, it's really depended on what we were specifically looking for at the time. Like if we ever planned the IPO, which I, don't see on our roadmap, but that's who I'd want. Is somebody who's been through that process, who's gone through an IPO either themselves, advised an IPO, been on a board of a company that's gone through an IPO. Right now, for instance, one of our advisors has a huge background in sales, and so within our industry, and worked at Bloomberg and some of those other companies. And we said, all right, this is somebody who's going to help us build a scalable sales pipeline and process that we can then replicate and apply what they've taught us to, I guess, succeed. I don't know if I answered the whole thing.
No, you did. That's great. And I meant to highlight that you're achieving great things at a young age as being a benefit of you. So I didn't mean to knock you.
No, I didn't take it that way.
I'll throw this out to the group and see if any of you guys have any relevant stories or thoughts or experience. But the board of directors serving as an accountability partner can be both a good and a negative thing. Meg, you touched on that a little bit when you talked about having a board or a board member that has been a founder or a CEO and understands the operational kind of hurdles that you have to go over. Can any of you share any stories about board members or even board advisors and being an accountability partner in either a positive or a negative way that was impressionable upon you?
I have an NDA, no confidentiality agreement, so I don't think I can share. Hi, Pat. I don't think I can share a negative, but I will tell you that as your company grows and as you raise significant amounts of money, it's important to remember who really can fire you. And it's the board. And they really are your ultimate boss. And if you become unaligned in terms of your vision, mission, goal, where you're driving the company, depending on the influence level and who has the money, can really influence the outcome of your future as the CEO of the company that you build and you love. So it's really important, I think, when you're working with board of directors, that communication level is very consistent. And as you mentioned, Alison, the beauty of a board of advisors is this is open, everything out there, all the words, this is a true help me through this. With a board of directors, you have to be more cautious about opening everything up and exposing yourself to what be an unintended consequence of you wanting 100%, open communication. I'm going to tell you everything what's going on behind the scenes. Now, board members have the right to come to your company, walk through the doors, tour, talk to your employees at any time. So it's not like you can hide what's going on in the real world every day. But again, they have the opportunity to really influence your future in a very direct way. And so making sure those are ongoing open communication in a controlled environment and building and sustaining those relationships as best you can.
That's great. Yeah, question.
What do you think is a sweet spot for a startup company to determine when they should bring their friend board of director on, leading into a round that they know is going to be happening a man that wants to get up to the investment group? So trying to, I think you understand what I'm saying. You're talking about board of directors more than likely want to get rid of founders. Me, I already know that, right? So where is that sweet spot
I'll repeat the question. So the question is, if you know you're about to raise money, and that will mean that, let's say a Series A, and they want 1 or 2 seats on your board, or at least the opportunity to determine and vote for those board. I was actually able to recruit those board members and then present them to my Series A investors. But I think, and Allison, you can back me up if I'm not saying this correctly, but if you know you're going into that, then that would be the time to say there will be 5 board seats. And you don't necessarily have to already know who those people are, but you do need to say there will be 5 board seats, and we can choose 1 or 2 of those. 1 will be me, the CEO or the founder. 1 or 2 will be selected by us, and 1 or 2 will be selected by the Series A shareholders.
That's great advice. I think I would add knowing that it matters to you and speaking up to your counsel, your legal counsel, the people who are helping you put a round together, whether you have an investment advisor or your co-founder. Knowing that it's important to you and speaking up about it's really, something that I would give as advice. I think a lot of founders oftentimes want to have a very small board at the beginning, easy to control. Sometimes it's a sole board member, and do a Series A round and maybe just have a 3-person board, by two founders and an outsider. But what that means is when you get to your Series B and they ask for a board seat, you've lost control. And that often happens at a Series B round, but the idea, I like Meg's idea a lot of saying our board's going to be a board of 5. It's going to consist of me, my co-founder, and 2 people that we mutually agree upon as co-founders and present to you, and you get 1 board seat. Setting forth that expectation early on and having a sizable enough board that you've got enough seats to appoint. The other thing to keep in mind is who does have those appointment rights, and how much of the cap table do you control as the founder? Because even if the board seats are elected by the majority of the common stock, if you find yourself in a position where you no longer have that majority, you can also be ousted as a board member unless you have specifically advocated for the right to appoint that seat. So it leads into a point I was going to talk about. When you do take on outside money or an outside partnership, I think the cultural fit with that investor is really important, and the board level really highlights that. And so oftentimes companies are just thankful to get a term sheet or go with the term sheet with the highest valuation because that's the biggest bang for the buck. But I think the cultural fit of that investor is of equal importance, both because you want somebody who's going to be invested in you as a founder or an executive at the company and invested in the company. And if they believe in both, it's going to be a great fit. If they believe in one and not the other, then you're probably in for a fight down the road. So I'd really assess that cultural fit when taking on investors who are going to have a board seat. Do you guys have anything else to add on that point? No. Have any?
I do have a question.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe, in that vein. So we're a C Corp. We have a 3-person board. Our bylaws stipulate that it's a pretty low ownership threshold or equity threshold for myself and my partner to be able to elect a board member, which ends up being us, right? And then we vote on the 3rd person, which we've selected today based on cultural fit. When we did our last money raise, we went out to people who were happy with us culturally, didn't really push hard to have control in any way. Assuming that we raise again, what is the challenge to us just changing our bylaws prior to that raise and having more board seats? Is there an impediment to doing that at that time in conjunction with the raise?
That's a great question. And I love that a panelist has a question. So you always want to be careful when expanding your board, when appointing board seats. You always want to go revisit your corporate documents to make sure that you're acting within their bounds. Oftentimes, the bylaws or certificate of incorporation are amended in conjunction with the financing. It happens 100% of the time with the certificate of incorporation. So it's really not an impediment at all to do that. But a lot of times, inexperienced founders or executives will appoint 7 board members, but they have a bylaws that say they can only have 3. And so then the question is, well, do those 4 board members, the votes that they voted on, do those count? No, they don't. And you're in hot water then. And so it's a great point to go back to your documents, to always be careful, to consult with your advisors, legal and otherwise, when coming up with how you want to structure the board and how many seats you want to have. But you can expand your board quite easily, and deciding who dictates who those board seats are. The default is, like I mentioned, the majority of your stock. So if you want to have it be something different, you have to advocate for it at that time of the financing. Do we have any other questions from the audience? Yes.
What are, when you're as an early stage startup, what would you say are must-haves or type of people that you must have in your board to kind of maximize the benefits that you get from them? And what is a good initial start point for equity?
So I'll repeat the question and then I'll see if you guys have an answer. So the question is, as a startup, what are the key things that it's really important that your board members have? What should you be looking for in those board members? And the second component of the question was, what's a good starting place for compensation for a board of directors? I'll see if you guys have any thoughts, and if not, I'm happy to advise on my end.
I can answer a little to my experience with that. In terms of compensation, I really think it depends a lot on what do you expect to get from them. If you have somebody who you're like, hey, I'd love to have you 20 hours a week or 10 hours, whatever, or 20 a month, whatever that is, you have to compensate them accordingly. But also, what is it that you're building? If you're expecting to become $100 million company, that stake might not need to be as high. Whereas if you think, this is going to be more of a smaller local kind of venture, then you might need to add some more stake to keep them interested. For us, we have all of our current advisors are also investors, except for one of them, which, is great in some ways, but also, we might not get feedback that's as direct as it might be, or we talked about boards specifically, they want to make money and look out for the financial interests of the company, whereas same with an investor, whereas maybe an outside advisor might say, hey, this is what I think you should do, with nothing at stake themselves.
Yeah, that's great.
So I've researched this quite a bit around advisory board members, and because almost always it's equity. A simple strategic advisory board member who is going to lend a Rolodex, connections, and periodically be responsive to you, and somebody you definitely want to put on the really cool people that believe in me in your pitch. It typically is between 1/2 and 2%, and the vesting can be anywhere from 2 years to 5 years, depending on the extent of their involvement. I personally ask for more because I'm pretty highly engaged, so I'm more on the doing. Active engagement. I actually provide a formal structure of engagement to my client companies where I serve as an advisor. So I ask for more than 2%, but it's not a big ask. It's not a high ask. And it just depends on the size of the company when I come in, what their ownership structure is. Is it an outright percentage? Am I getting shares? Am I participating in a convertible note offering? So it varies based on how that equity is going to accrue to me. And I actually have a 2-year agreement that we then review and determine whether we want to continue the same. Do we want to continue in a different way? Do we want to go for a longer period? One of the concerns that some founders have is, well, what happens if you want to leave? And I've made this investment in, my time with you, and I don't feel like we're in it together for the long haul. And when I first started doing this, my view was, well, I want to serve you as long as there's mutual value involved. So I want to be sure there's an opportunity to be reviewing and checking in, and is this still working for both of us? So it's very specific and unique. But if someone comes in and asks for 10% of your company for an advisor role, that's not appropriate.
Yeah, and
Just not.
I would be really careful. Back to the point about making sure that you have the capacity and the bandwidth to use those advisors. A lot of advisory agreements are just time-based vesting, meaning that you sign the agreement and they get equity every month as long as they're serving you. But if you don't have the time or bandwidth to call upon them to help you to execute on something, they're just getting equity for not really anything. And so, number one, don't be afraid to cut the cord if you realize you took on an advisor and they're either not helpful or you don't have the capacity to use them in the way that you want to at that moment in time. Don't be afraid to have the conversations and revisit at a later time when you will be able to use their services. So your job as a founder and as an executive is it's not your primary job, but really protect your cap table. Make sure that the advisors that you engage, if you're giving away equity, really add that value. It can be value of one introduction that, I had a company that was introduced to Leonardo DiCaprio, who invested in the company and put out this message. That's one introduction, but it led to a lot of publicity and it led to a lot of other introductions. So they each, they each range, but it's important that you keep all of that in mind. I think we have you've had a hand up.
Yes, I have a question for Meg. You said you get strategic partners, and you try to make sure that with the strategic partners that you get on your advisory board, they can do a specific function. I've been looking for those people kind of on LinkedIn and stuff, but how do you recruit a stranger to be an advisor for a company?
So of all the clients I work with, they have always, all but one has been through a personal referral by another advisor, somebody who has known me for a long time. However, one client found me on LinkedIn, reached out, set up a very structured conversation, told me what he was interested in and why he had reached out to me. And I have actually never had a face-to-face meeting with him, but it's via Zoom, and we're very active with each other. And I started as a board of advisor, and then this year he asked me to step up and be a formal board of director. So it is possible. I think if you really are clear about what you're looking for, and make sure you ask for references. Make sure you get more than one or two names. Get a list of who are other people that you've worked with, and I want to call them, and will you please make that work for me? And I'm always willing to do that for when I have a new client considering me. I reach out to my current clients and I ask them, you're going to get called, so just be honest with them and tell them what you think.
And I would say never be afraid to make the ask. What's the worst thing that can happen? They say no, they don't respond to your email. If there's somebody you really think is a good add to the company and you think it might be an interesting opportunity for them, never be afraid to make the ask. You can't lose. I think you had a question. Yeah, the question is, what do you think about warrants as compensation? Warrants are usually given to folks who are not in a service provider relationship with the company. So they're oftentimes given to lenders or strategic partners. The most common structure for board of advisors is an option grant, which is it operates in the same way that a warrant does. It just has a different securities exemption. So it's easier to use options than warrants in conjunction with a board of advisors. Yeah.
So Christian, you recently so you have 5 people on your board. Talk to me about how frequently they're involved. Like, what is your cadence with those individuals?
Sure. So we have 5 advisors, but the board consists of myself and my business partner, and we want to keep it that way as long as we possibly can. So I mean, I meet with my business partner multiple times per day and have phone calls with him. But in terms of advisors that we meet with, I try and do that once a month, kind of as a group. But then we have one specific advisor that we are compensating a little bit more heavily with, some more expectations around involvement. And but we meet with him twice a week, right? And so I guess, yeah.
Yes.
I was involved with an early startup where the board, after several meetings, determined that the CEO is basically not listening to them, being coachable at all. And they say it's kind of becoming a liability and showing these step back. Is there anything like that? At what point does a board membership become a liability? And other than stepping back, is there other things that they could?
Yeah. So the question was, to repeat it for everybody if you couldn't hear, a board member or a group of board members was providing advice and counsel and direction, but they didn't feel like they were being listened to, and ultimately decided they needed to step back. So what liabilities are there in conjunction with serving on a board, and how do you plan around those? So that fiduciary role of a board member, it's a real thing. And if you don't act in conjunction with your fiduciary duties, if you do serve on a board, it means you can get dragged into a lawsuit. And so if you're in a position where you're taking on a board seat, it's important for you to understand what your duties and roles as a board member are. I'd love to give a presentation on that someday because I think a lot of people don't understand or take it seriously. And if you feel like you're ever in a position, or a board member feels like they're in a position where they are attempting to exercise those fiduciary duties and they're being ignored, a lot of times they'll step down because they don't want to be part of a decision that they think is in either violation of law or their personal ethics. Before you take a board seat, there's a couple things you can do to protect yourself. One is an indemnification agreement. Most board members will ask for that. And that says basically, if I get dragged into a lawsuit, you company are going to pay for my defense. And that's a short summary of what it says. And then the other is D&O insurance, or errors and omissions insurance. Making sure that a company has insurance that in the event you ever do get dragged in that kind of a situation, that there are funds available to defend you and the company. But I think first and foremost, it's just important that you understand what your role is as a director. And as soon as you feel like you can't properly exercise that role for any reason, have a conversation about it first, the adults in the room, and try to address it. And then it probably is wise to consider resigning if you think it's not being addressed. Yeah.
Does anyone have any experience dealing with like conflicts of interest? Usually you're looking for folks that have experience in your industry, and assuming that they have full-time jobs, maybe they're executives. You run into that a lot where you want to control maybe how many boards they sit on, and possibly you run into
Yeah, fantastic question. So the question is, how do you think about conflicts of interest in your board? Because a lot of times you're looking for board members that have experience in your specific area. So there's a lot of crossover. I'll speak, and then you guys can add anything that you think is relevant. But whenever my clients sign on board members, we have provisions in there that if the other board members determine there's a conflict of interest, you can exclude that particular board member from discussion. You don't ever really want to be put in a position where you're doing that, but it's important to be mindful of that. And as another point, just this week, the Federal Trade Commission has come down on a lot of public company board of directors that serve on competing industries that compete in the same space. And that I think 150 public company directors resigned this week because they don't want to be facing questions about those competing interests. And so I would look for board members that serve in a corollary capacity. If you're looking for industry experience, maybe they serve in a different sector of the industry. Maybe you have a product, maybe they were in the manufacturing side of that business, or that they are no longer employed by those competing entities. But it's a line you always want to be careful of. And if there is really proprietary stuff that you think one of your board members could use to, maybe even inadvertently help a competitor, you want to be mindful of how you share that and, approach the discussion and consider whether it's appropriate for them to still be on your board. Do you guys have any additional thoughts on that? That's a great question.
I kind of wanted to take this, the question was asked about the board of directors, but in an advisory board as well. I had a situation where one of our board of advisory members happened to be a service provider also in a certain industry. And we knew that could be a little bit problematic going in. And I'll put most of this on myself. For myself, we got really great value out of them as an advisor, but there was always a little something in the back of my head asking, are they recommending that we do X or Y because potentially they're then going to be hired on to be a service provider to do that. And so I think that can be a little bit of a thorny situation, and probably in the future I would avoid that. I would avoid having anyone serve in that capacity where there might actually be an actual business transaction, from a service provider to us using that service in the future.
My answer was going to be kind of along the same lines as him. It's not directly a board, but we have not pursued where we had a warm introduction to a venture capital firm who had something in their portfolio that seemed maybe not exactly the same, but similar enough for us to feel like, maybe there'd be a conflict of interest there, and absolutely decided that was not what we wanted to do. So.
That's a good point, because most venture capitalists will carve out that specific role and say, hey, we see a lot of companies, we advise a lot of companies, we have a lot of portfolio companies, we can't represent to you that we won't service competitors. And so it is important to do that diligence. They're doing the diligence on you, so it's really important to do the diligence on them. And that's probably a good place to wrap this up. I think when you're considering, what this discussion has proved is when you're considering adding anybody in any capacity as a board advisor, as a board of director, in any capacity as an investor, do your diligence on them, because they're going to be doing it on you. Make sure and get really concrete about what your expectations are of them and the value you think they can add, and make sure you put it in the document so that you're both aligned and have a really concise and clear path forward. I think that's the best way to get the value that you're all looking for out of your board of directors and advisors. If you have any questions, always feel free to reach out to me. I'm sure any of our panelists would welcome your questions as well, but thank you for joining us.